Hey everyone, today I'm making a very bold claim, and that claim is that after this video, you will no longer hate Toxapex. And the game that I've got for you is one of the Smogon Premier League games in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon OU, and it's between Charmflash of the Circus Maximus Tigers and Sky Penguin of the Alpha Ruiners. And I'm going to just kind of go over it in the way that I would any other game, and then at a certain point in the game, you will hopefully have a bit more respect and a bit less contempt for good old Toxapex, everybody's favourite. So, team-wise, we've got two pretty balanced compositions on each side. And for both players, the main way to kind of force progress is looking like it's going to be their Gliss scores, because for both of them, they can start boosting up, and there's not really very much that can one-shot the Gliss scores on either side. Charmflash's Clefable is going to be carrying the Ice Beam, but that doesn't one-shot, it does about 75%. And you can also Roost to make it only ×2 effective for that turn. The Clefable could potentially be a threat if it starts Calm Minding up, but the Katana can always outspeed and kill it, and it needs too much coverage. It needs Flamethrower for the Magena, Thunderbolt for the Toxapex, Ice Beam for the Gliss score, and it just can't have all of that. So it's alright, but whichever coverage you don't have, you need to deal with that first to then start making progress. What's also very interesting about this game, and the reason that I first decided to watch it while looking through all the SPL replays, was Charmflash is bringing big Mega Aggron, which isn't really a thing that is seen at all. And the reason that Charm can do that is because they've got Wish support for it, which is so important because Aggron is very bulky, but it doesn't really work as part of a bulkier team because it has no recovery outside of rest, which is just too slow and gives your opponent too much. But with that Wish support, it can be a very effective answer to things like Katana. And so, very broadly, both sides are going to want to be positioning their Gliss scores to try and do some damage after some kind of pivoting and chipping and switching around and being bulky and annoying and scoping out what the other person's team is about. So with that, we're going to get straight into it. And Big Aggron is going to lead against the Tornadus, takes 37 off a Heat Wave, reduced by its filter, and it's able to paralyze the Tornadus. And so turn one, Aggron is already pulling its weight, and it can recover that off with Wish later. Just well done, Aggron, really. And it's going to switch out into the Chansey, taking a knockoff, and losing your Eviolite is pretty bad because suddenly the Diancie Diamond Storm is going to be a much bigger threat. You're not switching into Magena as comfortably forever. You need to be soft boiling more frequently. But equally, it's kind of a weird one of, it isn't really useful or helpful to leave your Aggron in because you're not one-shotting the Tornadus. You're just taking more damage that needs to be wished off. You absolutely cannot go into the Gliss score because your Toxic Orb hasn't activated yet, and you're not getting your Poison Heal. And so it just kind of becomes are you willing to give up the item on the Tornadus, Chansey, Clefable, Hydreigon, and in this case, Charm decides that it's the Chansey whose item can be lost, gets fully paralyzed as the Chansey gets the rocks up, and is then going to just go Gliss score, which is very safe because it just lets you get your Toxic Orb activated. A Chansey's not threatening you in any kind of way, and the Gliss score's able to just roost off that damage, and the Clefable coming in implies the Ice Beam, which is obviously going to scare out the Gliss score. And yes, you can live one and you can Earthquake into it, but it's just not a useful or worthwhile trade. But we see more switching and pivoting about. Charm gets the Gliscor in on the Toxapex and then goes out into Tornadus on the Kartana. So some good aggressive double switching from Charm staying on the front foot. And the reason that Gliscor scares out Toxapex, even though Toxapex can Scald and is very bulky, is that the Toxapex obviously can't burn it because it's poisoned, and Scald just doesn't do enough damage, meaning that Gliscor can just Swords Dance up on it and just boost up to the point that it can just smack through Sky Penguin's entire team. And so Charm sees that something like the Katana is going to pressure the Gliscor enough to prevent it doing that, and so is able to get the Tornadus in to threaten out the Katana. So out into Pex, doesn't take a whole lot from a Hurricane. Then Sky makes the kind of safe switch out to Magina, and the reason for that is that you don't want to be risking just getting Hurricaned and Confusion down with your Toxapex if you can help it. You want to keep that as healthy as possible for, well, the Tornadus that we're seeing, but also living a hit off the Gliscor in a pinch and annoying the Hydreigon and Clefable and everything else. And the Taunt from Charm is probably trying to stop the Toxapex from recovering up, because at this point you're keeping it at least a little bit low. No recover, the rocks are hampering its regen a bit, and the Magina is going to just have its leftovers knocked off. And it gets the initiative with Volt switching out, but it's a really good knockoff from Charm, because now the Magina just isn't ever recovering, and suddenly the 6% that you're taking every time you switch in that Magina is going to be adding up, and in the long term you become a lot less able to check the Hydreigon, the Clefable, those kinds of things. But Sky's going to get the initiative and is going to use it to get into the Diancie, staying in regular Diancie so that you take less damage from the U-turn, because regular Diancie has higher defenses than Mega. But now the Gliscor is going to get in, and we see Katana again on the Swords Dance. It's going to just Leaf Blade, which does a bit less than half, takes a big Earthquake, but at this point, yes, as the Gliscor, you can Earthquake and kill the Katana, but that leaves you so low that you're threatened by the Diancie, by Sky's own Gliscor, and so Charm assesses, okay, I'd rather keep the relatively high HP on my Gliscor than be put into positions where I've got to get it in safely to roost and seed a lot of momentum to do that. And the Katana is going to just synthesize back up, which kind of explains really why you're throwing out so much HP to an Earthquake that early, because you can just get it back. And Tornadus is going to knock off the Toxapex, and you may notice that an item is not knocked off, but anyway, the Hydreigon is going to come in, and there just isn't very much that a Pex can do to a Hydreigon, so that's pretty much always fine. You get burnt, which means that you can't get Toxic if the Pex is carrying that, and you're just kind of ready to start trying to be threatening. In comes a Tornadus on a Dark Pulse, and it takes loads of damage and it's going to be outspared in Dark Pulse, but I think what this is from Sky is just kind of scouting out what the Hydreigon wants to do, because it doesn't get Nasty Plot yet in Gen 7, so you're not risking letting that happen, and you're unlikely to Draco Meteor against a team with 2 fairies, and so you're seeing, is he going to go for something like an Earth Power or a Flamethrower? Whatever he does, I can just switch out and regenerate back up. And seeing the Dark Pulse, Sky is able to go into the Magina on the Defog, and the Chansey comes in on a potential Volt Switch, but Sky ends up just hard switching. And I think the reason for that hard switch is that if you Volt Switch into the Gliscor, if you're not carrying Ice Beam on the Magina, then you're in a kind of awkward position. But equally, you shouldn't ever risk the Gliscor on the Ice Beam now, and so I think you can kind of just Volt Switch knowing that. But Gliscor is going to threaten out the Chansey, and it just gets a Swords Dance, but is then going to switch out on the Clefable, which does reveal that it is Ice Beam, and that's just, again, good, careful play from Sky. Yes, you got up a Swords Dance, but is it worth the damage on the Clefable for taking that hit on the Gliscor? No, it isn't. Your Gliscor's HP is much more valuable for what it does for you. And at this point, we see more pivoting and switching about. This time Sky does Volt Switch, and the Katana gets in on the Chansey. And we see a double to catch the Aggron, but Sky is going to scout out the Ice Punch there, because is why he went Toxapex, because a Gliscor Earthquake isn't coming anywhere close to taking out the Aggron. More switching about, blah blah blah. Gliscor is able to Swords Dance again as it gets safely in on the Tornadus. And this time, you've got to Leaf Blade there. Like, even if the Tornadus is pretty free, you have to, as Sky, because you can't just let the Gliscor set up and almost immediately beat you. And so Charm is able to just get into the Tornadus and very freely U-turn. And the U-turn is really free there, but also you really shouldn't just risk throwing out your Katana. And even if you do decide to be ballsy and stay in on the U-turn, the Aggron or the Gliscor can just come in and not really care. So it's definitely the right play to switch out. Clefable is going to come in again. And we just see another Toxapex as Charm reveals the Wish. And Charm's going to get the Hydreigon heal back up there. And the reason that you go Hydreigon over the Aggron is because Sky, as we see, Scalds. And you're right to Scald potentially into that Aggron to burn it and punish the trying to wish it back up. But now the Hydreigon is healthy again, and you can find another chance to wish up that Aggron a bit later. The Hydreigon goes for the Focus Blast as the Toxapex just recovers. And the reason that you Focus Blast there is expecting the Magearna to get a bit more damage than something like a Dark Pulse, but it's also really free because worst case scenario, the Pex stays in, it can't touch you, it's a Toxapex, whatever. And the recover there from Sky is to just see what the Hydreigon wants to do, because if it Dark Pulses, you just heal back up. If it Draco Meteors, then more importantly, you just heal back up and are still fine after switching from the Regenerator. It's very free to just stay in and recover, but we're now going to see a Dark Pulse on the Scald, and Charm can potentially try and flinch the Toxapex down. Tornadus is going to come in, absorb another hit, whatever, burn damage, still backing up, and the Hydreigon is then going to just roost. And so we get into this kind of just a bit of a stalemate. Not too much is really happening. Magearna on a Dark Pulse, bit more damage, sure. Now the Hydreigon's going to reveal the Z, and the all-out pummeling is going to hit the Magearna. And when I first saw the Z, I thought, is this potentially Inferno Overdrive, Earth Power, Tectonic Wrath? But it makes sense to drop the Z fighting here, because of things you're going to hit, you're never staying in on the Diancie with a Hydreigon. The Katana is going to just die to a Dark Pulse, and you're not Z-fighting anybody else, so you might as well just get the damage off, and the Magearna is unlikely to Ice Beam into the Chansey, which would be very slow and cede momentum and give Charm rocks. So you're able to just get that extra damage on the Magearna, which is going to help open up your Clefable, but then Sky's able to get in the Diancie, Mega Evolve, and the crit Moonblast is a bit rough because that would have done about 48, 50, and then with the extra sort of 20, 25 or so % health that you'd be on, you could live the next one and threaten it out with an Earthquake or just roost back up and heal. But as is, you're forced to switch out into the Aggron, and you now need to find an opportunity to get the Gliscor back in and get it healed up just as soon as possible so that you can win Gliscor mirror matches, come in on the Katana, etc. And Charm is then going to make the slightly risky Gliscor on the Earth Power just to get up an extra bit of Poison Heal, which, if Sky reads, you pretty much just lose the game on the spot. if Sky were to Moonblast into your Gliscor, but that doesn't happen, so I guess it works out. And I'm hesitant to say, like, terrible play or anything like that, or overly risky, because these people are far better at the game than I ever will be. But Moonblast into the Chansey, and the Chansey isn't taking Diamond Storms well without its Eviolite, but the 95 accurate move misses, which is a bit rough for Sky and puts Charm in quite a good position of being able to just very freely Seismic Toss. And we see this Seismic Toss on the Tornadus. The Tornadus being a good move because you regenerate it all off and you're racking up Rocky Helmet damage on the Chansey, which it can only heal by wasting a turn soft boiling, giving you some initiative, which it does there, as the Tornadus is going to taunt to prevent rocks going up. And that also means that your Chansey is now stuck on very low HP. Not very low, on 84 rather than 100, because it can't immediately softball back up. If you're able to get rocks up, then it's even lower, and without its Eviolite, it's just not that good. The Gliscor is going to come in on the Tornadus here, and a crit there would have been very rough, but also it's paralyzed, it could miss, you're probably going to be fine, and now you just outspeed and can very freely roost back up, which Charm is going to do. And we just continue this kind of attritional pivoty shit for a bit until we get this Gliscor mirror match. And Facade on another Swords Dance, and Gliscors are just all over the place in this generation, and this is why, because they're just really good. And now that Gliscor's gonna Swords Dance up, take a lot from a Facade, and either Sky's Gliscor is a bit faster or he's just getting very lucky on some speed ties. But at this point, you have to sack something. Your own Gliscor is too important, so Charm lets the Hydreigon go down, which with a Magearna, a Diancie, a Toxapex, and a Gliscor, it's gonna struggle to really make all that much progress, so it does make sense as a sack. And now Clefable comes out to threaten the Gliscor with the Ice Beam again. Sky just going for the roost because you then come out of it on a little bit more health with the Poison Heal. Ice Beam into the Magearna, freezes, which is very lucky because it's going to let in Charm's own Gliscor. And on the frozen Magearna, you are able to just start setting up your Gliscor again and essentially just put Sky in the same position that you were in, of something is going to have to be sacked. And so the Katana is going to synthesis up, but then die to the Earthquake, which is potentially Sky again expecting Charm to not want to risk the HP on the Gliscor to get the kill, as happened earlier, but in this case Charm is going to just go straight for that Earthquake, making it 5-5, and now the Toxapex comes out. But the problem with Toxapex against Gliscor is that Scald just doesn't do enough damage, especially with the Poison Heal, and you can't burn it, so the Gliscor just sets up on you, and in these kinds of balanced team matchups, the Gliscor just sets up to the point that it can Earthquake and Facade through more or less everything. And so Charm is gonna just go for the Earthquake, try and kill the Toxapex, as we see the fucking Z Sub-Zero Slammer. The Gliscor goes down. We see now that knockoff earlier that didn't knock anything off, what that meant, and the Gliscor that would have just Earthquake twice and then pretty much just threatened through the entire rest of the team is down. And why that's so important is that if we look at the rest of Charm's team, there just isn't really any offensive presence left. Like, that was the main way of breaking, really. And the Tornadus is more of a support type of set. The Clefable, as we've established, just doesn't really have enough to break through the whole team. The Aggron is fundamentally an Aggron. And Sky, essentially at this point, just wins on the spot from this Toxapex that, seeing his team's susceptibility to Gliscor, as a whole, as we saw throughout this game, until this moment, Sky puts Blizzard and ICMZ on the Toxapex, which just isn't a set. That's not a thing in any capacity. But Sky brought it to an SPL match, and it worked. And so we're going to just see now that, I'm going to put it on fast, that Charm just doesn't have offensive presence really anymore, and this Pex is able to just get itself back up. Charm's going to wish up the Aggron, just try and keep everyone healthy, keep things going for as long as possible. He's got rocks, he talks about his blizzards to flex. He's got his wishes, he's got all that kind of jazz, but there just isn't really enough left on this team to break the Toxapex. And sure, you can paralyze it, but how are you going to kill it? The answer is that you're going to struggle. And you can even try and hurricane and paralyze it down through the regenerator, but it can just switch out, regenerate it back up as much as it wants. And we just see Charm kind of floundering around, not able to break the Pex without the Gliscor. Sure, you can taunt that Gliscor, stop its swords dancing, prolong things a bit, but yeah, just ultimately you can prolong it, but you can't win. And the Aggron came in on a Scald, didn't get burnt. You can't rely on that continuing to happen. And we just see more and more floundering, really, as the Gliscor sets up and is forced out by the Aggron Ice Punch, which it reveals. But, that Clefable Ice Beam to Toxapex, just look at this. The Pex can even threaten the Tornadus a bit because it's carrying the Blizzard. And the remaining Mons, there just isn't anything they can do, really. The Magina thaws out and Pain Splits to rub it in a bit. Aggron gets healed up. It goes for the Iron Head to try and do some kind of power flinch shenanigans. Gets burnt by a Scald. And that is that. And we see here the duality of Pex. To some extent, there's the usual, you lose a game because you can't break Toxapex, what an unfun mon, this is bullshit. But we also see the ICMZ, the Sub-Zero Slammer, the Pex that offensively checks the Gliscor and is able to win the tournament game for Sky Penguin. I don't know what my feelings about Pex are now, but I'd say I hate it at least a little bit less, and I hope that from this game, you might do as well. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.